Hi, it's a great honor to be here to share with you about investment. We are looking forward to what's happening. We have been hearing AI for a whole day, and then I think three of us are very. I think we know each other for a while. Especially I know Jason for almost 20 years, and then. And also Eric, we have been just knowing maybe 3-4 years, but we are becoming a good friend. So this section, this panel will be going to be more, while side chatting, and we'd like to share some of our idea with you. So let me introduce a little bit myself. I'm CEO of Taiwania Capital. Actually, I spend most of the time in Silicon Valley. And I just moved back to Taiwan about 7-8 years ago, but not really moved back. I'm just, flying across the Pacific Ocean to bring some of my experience in high-tech experience and also investment. So Taiwania actually is a very young venture capital sponsored and supported by National Development Fund and also some of the financial institutions in Taiwan, as well as some of the enterprise. So we only have a 6 fund in 6 years. So although it's small compared to IVP, but we still fast growing venture capital in Taiwan. And what we try to do is through investment, we want to bring up the partnership globally. And we focus on biotech. We also focus on deep tech. So AI is also one of the areas that we are interested to invest for any of the emerging technologies. So, and actually I just flew in last night from Tokyo, and I know Eric is flying to London tonight, and Jason is also flying back to Taiwan tonight. So, given all this time, I really appreciate Eric and Jason's participation in this section. So we are going to talk about what's the future disrupt technologies through investment. So with that, I would like to have Eric, talk a little bit about yourself, and then Jason.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be speaking to all of you, and hopefully you're still feeling some energy after a long day of great content, and we'll do our best to keep you entertained and educated at the same time. So my name is Eric Liaw. I'm one of the general partners at IVP. IVP is a venture capital firm that has a 43-year history here in the Bay Area and increasingly in Europe as well. And just as technology evolves over cycles and decades, which I think we're going to talk about today, so has IVP. So just to give you some context, when IVP was started in 1980, one of the first investments we ever made was in a company called Seagate. And it was speculative technology back then and also a speculative market. People weren't sure that there would ever be a need for storage, and even if you needed storage, it didn't need to be that small. Obviously, we recognize how much storage we all have in our pockets, and the industry has evolved. And that's been true for our firm into the 90s with the internet boom and bust. We invested in the first round of a company like Netflix, and it's continued to persist where we're now more recently investors in companies like Twitter, Snap, Discord, CrowdStrike, HashiCorp, Datadog. So that is a common theme in technology, the sort of rebirth and innovation, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that today. I've been in the venture business myself for 20 years now and joined IVP about 12 years ago.
Oh, let me add one point. Eric actually is the top 100 venture capitalist worldwide 2 years in a row. IVP has been one of the leading tier 1 and outperform other ventures. But Eric is really number 1 out of number 1. So outperform. So it's my honor to know him, and also to have my honor to invite you to join this section.
It sounds much better when David says it instead of me.
Okay, Jason.
So my name is Jason Wang. I'm a professor at Stanford University School of Medicine. Before I joined academia, I spent a couple years with McKinsey & Company in Asia. And I also work at the think tank in the United States, the Wang Corporation, before becoming an academic. And since becoming an academic, I co-founded a company cognitive health about 11 years ago, and it's based on AI and IoT, and the goal is to help the elderly to prevent falls and pressure ulcers when they are living at home or in the hospital. It's a pleasure to join this panel. Like David said, we know each other for a long time. Actually, known Eric for 40 years. We were just counting, and it's a very exciting time for technology.
So Jason is not just a professor, medical doctor. He also a founder of Connecto. I think it's a healthcare system. So he really entrepreneurs. So we are going to hear from both of them to share. So I think.
Sorry, can I say one thing since we're all saying nice things about each other? So Jason, as he points out, and I have known each other for 40 years. We're family friends. Our brothers went to junior high and high school together. And so this is a statement of fact, not of judgment. I'm younger than Jason. But what that means when you're growing up is then, when your mom's best friend's son is so accomplished and smart, your mom's like, well, why can't you just be like Jason? And clearly you heard what he's done, and I can't do that. So that's why I went to venture capital.
Okay.
He's done better things.
Okay. So let's get into the AI business. AI frenzy, actually spark enormous amount of related demand across several sectors, such as high tech and also biotech at a global scale. And as we all hear from this morning until the hardware in the AI area, we see this phenomenal growth. So I'd like to ask Eric, your perspective. AI investment is booming. Is all the hype around the generated AI warrant or overblown? For the next 5 years, how do you see the role of AI plays in the venture capital and also startup ecosystem, and how it going to benefit the whole ecosystem? So you can talk from the investment, venture capitalist point of view, and Jason, you probably can comment from the entrepreneurs.
So there's a lot in that question, and I think the specific answer varies on where in that time frame that we're talking about. I tend to agree with some of the comments from the prior panel that there is a hype cycle, and I've certainly seen over the last 18 months companies that really aren't AI companies try and attach AI to their names so that they can get a better valuation or get some more investor interest. So that's absolutely true for private companies. I think public companies. I think the prior statement, but I see it on the private side. I do think there's a bit of a hype cycle because the potential transformative power of what AI can do for different products, companies, jobs is something we haven't seen really in quite some time. I think you can credibly say that there's potential that this is sort of a white-collar industrial revolution with what AI can bring in terms of the efficiency, greater speed, greater pace of execution. However, that is not all here today. And like in many examples across technology and disruption throughout history, the potential gets out in front of the reality, and then, as Gartner would put it, the trough of disillusionment sets in. And I think we're actually a bit on the cusp of seeing some of that disillusionment, because the prior 12 to 18 months, you saw a lot of fundraising activity, very high valuations. In fact, it was the only subsector of technology where valuations and investment dollars still looked a lot like the activity from 2021, which we of course know was, in hindsight, excessive and unrealistic. So where I think where we will see changes in actual impact is when you have AI that is tailored to a specific use case, and probably a little bit more narrowly than some of the underlying LLM models are talking about today. So I'll give you an example of a company that we looked at. It's probably going to cut the number of paralegals that are out there. And that might be a good thing, because if you think about that as a knowledge industry, that is the lowest level of that particular industry. And so this company, it's called EvenUp, they use some of the different models out there. And we're not an investor, by the way, so I'm not just promoting one of our companies. We actually maybe should have invested, but we're not. But they can expedite the process of creating the initial claims letter that happens in some legal processes. Is it perfect? No, but does it get you from a blank piece of paper to probably 80% of the way there in a fraction of the time and a fraction of the cost? Yes, and that's where you can start to see impact. And then I think that this will continue to happen over the next couple of years as problem-specific solutions become better and better and better. And I guess the one thing I would also point out is, well, I'll ask the audience, like if you remember Look Smart, raise your hand. No one. If you remember InfoSeek, raise your hand. Nobody. How about Alta Vista? So a few people. So clearly, those were all early incumbents in the early part of the internet that have now all been completely demolished and disrupted by Google. But Google was, the point I'm trying to make is Google was not the first player in search in even that phase of the internet. I mean, it really didn't pick up speed until after everyone else had crashed in the internet bubble. And so I think you will probably see the same thing, which is a theme that we talk about, that the long-term winners, when there's a new platform shift, usually aren't the first ones that you hear about. So for everyone in this room, if you want to think over the next 5 years, I would keep your eyes and ears out for what actually starts to gain sustainable traction.
Yeah, thank you. Jason? What?
I'm just going to focus on the healthcare sector because that's the sector I'm most familiar with. So there's no question that there's going to be application of AI, particularly generative AI in the healthcare sector. So we've actually, in the last year or two, we've gone through a lot of changes in the healthcare system. During COVID, for example, almost there's universal adoption of telehealth. And so now it's becoming part of the clinical practice. During the last 3 or 4 years, too, the FDA has approved 520 algorithms that could be used clinically. And so definitely people are looking at algorithms, looking at the machine learning algorithms and its application in healthcare. And when you look at the potential for AI in healthcare, I would look at the different areas. For example, the patient-facing area. So if you think about what you need to do when you go see a doctor, you need to make an appointment. And so that, could be automated. There's no reason why you need to call somebody to make that appointment. And billing too. So that area to receive billing, to pay for things, that could also be automated. And also, there's a lot of lonely people out there that require mental health support. And you know what chatbot is really good at? Chatting with people. Okay, it's really good at chatting with people. And once you figure out the right tone, I don't think people have done that yet, the right tone to engage individuals so that makes people feel better. It could take 10 years to train a psychiatrist to actually get the right tone, ask the right questions. But if you get a chatbot to act in that capacity correctly, they will probably prefer talking to a chatbot because that is individualized to that person. So that's just the patient-facing side. If you look at the provider-facing side, so what do we do during most of our time is to summarize data. So when we see a patient, we have to review all the medical records, try to figure out what is the most pertinent part of the medical that we can't miss. A diagnosis, a specific problem, an allergy to a medication. That could actually all be summarized by AI, and it could all get better with training. Now, granted that you need to get the right database to train it. I think the proprietary nature of the database, I think, would be important. And then you look at the administrative portion, the billing cycle, asset management in a hospital. There's probably 5,000-6,000 vendors that a hospital needs to manage for procurement of different equipments and so forth. And those are all potential opportunities. The analytic portion, for example, what we used to train people to do, to summarize research data, that would take 8 months. We could do it in 2 seconds right now. So a lot of the RAs are going to be out of the job. Because basically the ability to synthesize information, particularly with generative AI, is very, very powerful. And in a life sciences application, when you try to develop a new drug, you look at the structure of the molecule in 3 dimensions, and you try to figure out if one mutation here or one change it there, the 3-dimensional structure, and when you try to create drugs, I think it will also become a powerful tool. Now, that being said, the future of AI in healthcare is determined by the lack of transferability among data sets. It's actually the incumbents have very tight control over data. and also over patients groups are very sensitive about their information being shared across health systems. And so for entrepreneurs to engage in this activity, it's going to be a lot harder given the sales cycle. So you need to establish trust with a healthcare institution for them to give you data. So if you're a new company, they're like, well, you're not going to exist in 3 years. Why should I sign with you? And so you see the incumbents like, Oracle, Cerner, Epic and Microsoft are working together. And these are all big incumbents that people know that they're going to be there in the next 3 to 5 years. So I would say that there are opportunities, but you need to figure out what is your unique competitive advantage if you're a startup.
Sorry, it's funny because we didn't plan this, but actually when Jason was listing through the different portions of the healthcare industry that could actually be disrupted, I've seen multiple companies pitching some of those solutions in the last 6 months. So billing, for sure, there's probably 4 or 5 different companies out there on the billing side. It's complicated, but it actually shouldn't be a task that a human being needs to do, right? That's where I think AI can have an impact. Think about jobs that are repetitive, slightly complicated with specific rules. Those are things that AI can do better and more efficiently than humans. Even if it's not all the way right, getting through the vast majority of it and then having one last set of eyes, that's where AI can make an impact. We've definitely seen them on sort of the documentation and summarization. In fact, one company that we had met with and talked about, their premise was using some of the public tools from speech to text to actually allow doctors just to dictate the record and the diagnosis, probably in passing to the next patient, and have that go into the system and have that largely captured. And then at the end of the day, the doctor can make sure that this is actually what captured and it goes to the sort of EMR. Like that actually saves time. And I'll use this example too, because then it allows the doctor whose time and skills should not necessarily be completely replicated by an AI platform to go see the next patient, which is the uniquely human part of the process. So I don't think humans are going away at all. And the chatbot one, I think, is actually pretty interesting because, I think you were talking about it from a perspective of telehealth and mental health services, which are, I think, more regulated and more controlled. But actually, when you think about some of the direct-to-consumer AI chatbot companies, they're kind of like the wild, wild west. And we've actually had an ethical discussion in our firm about whether we want to invest in some of these companies because they don't have guardrails. And many times the people that are lonely are also potentially teetering on being more susceptible to mental health problems. And if you sort of let an AI engine go on its own, it can take you to pretty dark places. And instead of actually making you feel better about yourself, it can make you feel worse. And so we've actually chosen not to invest in those companies because there aren't guardrails. And that's similar to many other technologies where, it comes out, you're not sure about the full impact, and then you have to, and I'm not a fan of regulation in general, but you have to have some kind of guardrails and regulation on how some of these products interact with people because they could have negative repercussions.
Yeah, coming to this summit actually remind me a slogan when I joined Cisco in 1992. That is, the internet will change the way we work and we pray and we live. I think AI also impact the society in that manner, the same manner too. So I find out when Cisco becoming such a big, network giant, we see so many players, from the switch, from the even 3Com or Bay Network, they are the first mover, but they are not actually turned out to be the best, And I think behind it is because of Sequoia. Venture capital behind it and give you the, steering the direction, the strategy, the execution, including the M&A. So I pay a lot of respect to the, venture capitalist founder, Don Valentine. He became the first chairman of Cisco and be able to steering the company to move into the right business practice and be able to harvest, the technology. So although AI is the hottest topic of the year, and there are still many other frontier technologies that are critical to our future. So I'd like to know that, Eric, can you share some of the key trends and innovation other than AI that may shape investment going forward, as well as opportunities that may be present in not just US, but in Europe? I know you just moved to London, so what's your perspective?
So let me I'll give two examples and try and be a little bit off the beaten path because that was what you were sort of prompting. The first one is we are seeing a lot more opportunity, interest, tailwinds, entrepreneurs moving into some sort of climate tech, environmental tech. And I'm not talking about things like carbon recapture plants. Those are great. Or people that are going to go sell you carbon credits and go plant trees somewhere else. Those aren't really venture business models. But particularly in Europe, where the regulatory burden for environmental benefit is stronger, the regulations are actually coming in place, and therefore entrepreneurs are rising to meet that challenge. And what we're seeing is a measurement of carbon footprint, for example, for companies. Where you can't actually say you're carbon neutral if you don't, you can't improve what you don't measure. You need third-party verification systems. A lot of that can be done through software and analytics. We are seeing companies, so we're looking at more asset-light business models. So companies like that I think are pretty interesting. And I think ultimately some of those trends that are regulatory-driven in Europe will also make their way around the world. I think Europe is a leader on that dimension, whether you think it's excessive or not. I think that's the truth. California then tends to follow. Obviously, you see what California can do as far as the California Air Resources Board and dictating EV trends throughout the United States. But you're also seeing that pressure come from shareholders who are then pressuring the institutions like BlackRock, who are then pressuring companies. So I think there will have to be opportunities and entrepreneurs that are offering, again, probably software products to help address some of these challenges. And then I think the other one, which historically has not been an area that venture capital has been very tightly linked with the buyer, and in this case, I'm telling you, it's probably the government agencies around defense and defense tech. Usually, venture capitalists have not been eager to fund those business models because the buying cycle is challenging, the procurement cycle to getting through Congress is challenging. Congress changes every 2 years. Bills may or may not get signed. But I think as we are clearly in a new environment with respect to geopolitical tensions, I think people across the political spectrum and as entrepreneurs are recognizing that there's work to be done, particularly in places like information security, and that's in some ways an evergreen market for VC because there are always more bad guys out there. It just used to be bad guys who are trying to steal your money, but now you have state-sponsored bad guys who, that's their job. They go into their computer labs from 9 to 6 every day, and they're just trying to figure out how to hack your systems. That creates more interest in working with the private sector to sort of fund and buy the next generation of cybersecurity.
Yep. Jason, anything?
Yeah. So I want to go back to how people's lives, the way people live, have changed, and to discuss sort of potential opportunities. And so, during COVID, for example, most research labs are closed. Okay. So graduate students actually have to take turns. Like you actually get your slot. Sometimes it's 2 a.m. until 6 a.m. where you get to go to the lab because they can't have too many people in the lab. Okay. So now if you think about it, there's really no reason why people need to be in the lab because a lot of what you're doing in the lab, the pipetting could all be automated. But I think automation is one area where a lot of the things that they used to take humans, and you could run an experiment in your head and just ask the robots to do it. And so a lot of the wet labs, I think, in the future will become dry labs where you could just work from your computer. And that's a lifestyle change. The other thing is that during COVID, we also found that hospital is a dangerous place, right? Like people don't really want to hang out in the hospital for too long. And so, particularly with the elderly. And so hospital at home is going to be more and more of a trend, I think, in the United States, because also hospitals are very expensive places, right? So how to equip the home with the right type of sensors, the right type of monitoring that enables the clinical decision making, and you can come in if you need to, but you don't really want to, and nobody really wants to go into the hospital unless they have to. They could eat their own food at home. They don't want hospital food. Okay. And so, our company, Cognito Health, is involved in remote patient monitoring of the elderly to prevent pressure ulcers and falls. And I think there's a lot out there that could actually, for the monitoring of an individual in the future. There are also exciting opportunities in healthcare for disease prediction, prevention, and early intervention. So the omics, right? So we have genomics, we have the transcriptomes, omics, the proteomics, right? The metabolomes, and all things are basically signals from your body that tells, it could be sort of early detection of something that might not have shown up clinically yet, but you could detect it early by measuring. And so I think there are exciting opportunities after the human genome has completely been sequenced and now could actually be manipulated in a way that could lead to pretty exciting outcomes. And so I think there are these areas that are sort of emerging, and I think there will be great opportunities there. And I agree with Eric that there are some areas where you have to take two big problems and work on them together. Like if you could make all these equipments more environmental friendly, make sure they are more biodegradable, and as you move towards new technology, some of these big missions could be met together. I think that'll be great.
Yeah, Jason was interviewed by more than hundreds TV or radio interviewed during the COVID pandemic. I think he is really truly the opinion leader in the public health area, and also provide a lot of opinion to the government as well. So, and I agree with Eric. Cybersecurity is evergreen, and also continue to be a very I would say people are chasing after because there's an endless solution to these hackers. So I remember when I was with Cisco, we see cybersecurity is not that important because router and switching is still the bread and butter. So afterward, I invested one company called NetScreen from 3 people. So when I put in the money into that, I didn't know what I'm going to get out of that. But
a lot. That was a great investment.
But today, if you look at the cybersecurity, after NetScreen, not just one company, they exit about $4 billion valuation after 7 years of the first check. And after that, we see Fortinet, we see Palo Alto Network. Now their market valuation is enormous. I even keep not tracking of how much they worth. I know Ken Shea, one of the founder from NetScreen. He used to respect me or admire me as a rich man. Now I look back, he has more than $4 billion in his net worth. I say, what? So I think cybersecurity, the disruptive technology, really generated a lot of the wealth, and that's what the venture capital is really looking after that. So, let me switch the gear a little bit. Follow all this control, the exporting about sensitive technology, like including AI, including semiconductor equipment between the US and China. I think the supply chain is going to be disrupted, and the world is going to be different. I think they are going to be a two camp. And I would like to ask what's your perspective on how the macroeconomy headwind and the geopolitical friction will impact investor and also the entrepreneur's behavior? Either way.
When we talk about geopolitics, I think to think about what are the causes of this geopolitical conflict, right? And so today, the United States is competing with China on big ideas. Okay, so what are these big ideas? One is, what's the way of life people want to live in? Is that a democracy or is that an autocracy? These are huge, very important big ideas in conflict. Technology supremacy that governs influence of these two big countries. And then the respect for the rule of law. So these are very big ideas. This is why US is currently in competition with China on these big ideas. And so when you think about how to strategically navigate this opportunity or challenge, I think you have to look at the root cause of these conflicts. And so even during the pandemic where the world stops for 3 years, there are great opportunities during the pandemic, right? For example, Taiwan did very well. Why did Taiwan do well? Because Taiwan has a technology sector that was very vibrant. During the pandemic, everybody needs computers, everybody is online, semiconductors, there's a shortage. And Taiwan was able to keep on producing them because it has very few cases. And so that turned Taiwan into a competitive advantage for Taiwan. So in a geopolitical conflict, you have to look at what are the winners and what are the losers. And how do you position yourself so that you win more and you lose less, right? And then finally, the idea is don't put all your resources in terms of, don't over-rely on one market for your resources. And don't over-rely one market for your product, for your market. And so this is sort of the core of competitive dynamics, right? That people are fighting for resources, people are fighting for markets. And when you are dealing with geopolitical conflicts, do not put all your eggs, don't put all your resources in one market and don't put your product. And I think that would diversify your risks.
I have a few thoughts on this, perhaps unsurprisingly, and I'll try and hit them based on specific topic. But I'll start with capital. I think capital flows are very, very challenged, and I think that this is, China is basically uninvestable for Western investors, period. There's a lot of capital from mutual funds, et cetera, that, for example, is stuck. I mean, Ant Financial was supposed to be this amazing IPO, the biggest one ever, and then all of a sudden, one person made a decision to shut it down, and the company's value has been crushed. What their business model was forced to separate, and foreign capital is probably never going to get out. I mean, a lot of the investors have marked it down on paper, but they actually haven't gotten their money back, and unclear whether they can. It'll be unclear whether non-Chinese investors in ByteDance can ever actually get their money out, or if they do, at what price. And so the thing is, when you have things like that happen overnight, investors hate uncertainty. They expect a certain set of rules, and then they expect to be able to invest and then into companies that can compete within those rules. But when the rules of the game change overnight, and then you have nothing to show for it as an investor, you don't forget that, because the trauma of that investment outcome was outside of your control, and it happened so quickly. And you can see in this sort of bipolar world that China started to realize they have some problems. They have some demographic issues. They have some really bad debt issues that, in my opinion, will make the Japanese property and bubble and the debt bubble of the 80s look trivial, because it's a much bigger country. But they're trying to, soften some of the controls that they put in. So these are all self-inflicted wounds. I mean, they're trying to soften these controls. But again, I think Western capital is going to say, fool me once, okay, fool me twice, shame on me, right? Like that's how that typically goes. So I think capital flows are going to be bifurcated for the foreseeable future, because people have memories, and then eventually, if they forget or things change, maybe they'll invest again. But I think generally capital flows are going to come to a pause. I completely agree with Jason's point about diversification, both in terms of supply chain, which you're starting to see, of course, right? I mean, Apple has been talking about this for quite some time, moving their manufacturing to other places, including in India, including in Vietnam. I think that trend is going to continue. It's just going to take a long time, because for decades, the world relied on China to build things for everybody. No longer will the world do that. And on the flip side, I think there's now a new awakening, or a reawakening, that probably never should have been forgotten, that it's an unequal playing field when you're a Western or non-Chinese company trying to invest in China, right? Just to remind people, when Volkswagen went there, they were bringing all the technology for the cars. They were bringing all of the models and everything, but they had to form a JV of which they could only own 49%. That's, they accepted that deal. But now I think as people I mean, David would know this from Cisco. There was clearly forced IP transfer, and I think now companies again realize this. And so there was. I don't see this changing anytime soon, unfortunately, and I think it'll be quite some time before people are willing to invest and dedicate resources to less friendly political regimes. In fact, we've seen this in our portfolio companies. They've moved people and operations out of unfavorable jurisdictions because they're unpredictable.
Yeah, I can, witness what happened to Huawei and Cisco in the year 2000. That all of our software, iOS IP was not respected. Yet we cannot do anything about that against Huawei in China or in US. So we end up, but the government cannot do anything about it either. So I think that's a long overdue in terms of IP respect. But I think right now the US government is trying to do something about it. So given all the pandemic and also the geopolitical factors that a lot of the valuation of high tech or even the capital inflow to the venture capital has been dying or dry out. So Eric, I would like to see your perspective. What's the current state of, and what's your prediction about the capital market will become, in a couple of years?
So I don't think we can talk about the next couple of years. I'll just a quick second on what happened, which was obviously during the pandemic period, we had something happen which had never happened before in human history, which is every single reserve currency in the world was being printed in mass quantities, and every single major government was incurring massive amounts of spending to keep the economy moving. You can debate whether or not the magnitude was too great. In hindsight, it probably was, but it happened. And so now we're dealing with the aftermath. What also happened with all that currency and capital being created is that it had to go somewhere. Economies didn't just expand at the same rate that the capital base did. And so that came into all kinds of assets, real estate, public stocks, private stocks where I invest in the venture capital business as well. And now, obviously, rates are going up, money's coming out of the system by design. It's going to take a while, but that means that capital has also left the tech industry. And in '99, and even in the financial crisis, the technology industry was a smaller percentage of US GDP. I'm just talking about the US for a second. Was a smaller percentage of GDP. And so if you had interest rate sensitivity or weaker demand, it was from non-tech companies. It didn't really affect technology companies that much. But now, actually, for the biggest technology companies, oftentimes their biggest customers aren't other technology companies, but they're non-tech companies because everyone has adopted software and cloud computing and things like that. And so when those companies face real demand weakness, intentionally incurred by the Fed for good reason, that is now flowing through into tech companies where it's harder to grow your revenue. And so as a result, you couple that with the change in the capital market environment, investors are much less willing to invest in high growth, high value, high risk technology companies. Then they have to make sure that they make their liquidity balance last, their cash balances last. And that's where we saw a lot of the layoffs across the tech sector over the last 2 years. And it's actually still continuing. Maybe they're not making headlines as much anymore because it's old news, like who hasn't had a layoff at this point? But that's going to continue for some period of time. And this may sound a little bit counterintuitive, but I'm actually okay with that. I'm actually kind of happy about that. Because at least for the venture capital industry and for someone who has been in the industry for 2 decades, whose firm has been in the industry for more than 4 decades, I'm actually happy to see what we affectionately call the tourists leave and go home. So valuations have come down, round sizes that companies are raising at any stage have come down. Because the model used to be, if you were a company, you raise what you need to get from point A to point B, and then you prove that it's working, and then you can raise the next round to get to point C on this journey. You're not trying to raise all the money you're ever going to need to take your business to its end goal at once. Yet that was often happening in 2021. So I think the environment is more normalized, if you will. Actually, I think it could probably normalize a little more and become a little tighter. But I don't expect a fast rebound, and I don't think that would be healthy anyway.
Yes, I agree with you. Maybe that's one of the I see this happening. The cyclical, up and down, and one of the, maybe the good opportunity to invest at a fair market valuation. Yeah. As a founder, Jason, how are you going to survive or thrive in this such kind of challenging environment?
Well, I'll talk about survival first, because I think thriving comes later. As you know, during COVID, hospitals, you're not allowed to go into hospitals. Okay, only the people who need to be in the hospitals are allowed in the hospital. So when we're trying to sell products to hospitals, that was basically no. They don't talk to vendors, nothing like that. Okay. And then after the Silicon Valley Bank kind of tanked, and it became very, very difficult to raise funds. So what did we do during this time? So we kept on reflecting, are we solving an important problem? Right? So when you're a startup, you want to make sure that the problem you're trying to solve is important to society, and it will be there, and it will probably grow. Right. So when we look at it, yes, we are solving an important problem. It's the elderly population. There's going to be more care, probably both at home and in the hospital. Then we need to be hyper-focused. So what is something that we need to do, not want to do, not, adding bells and whistles, but what are the one thing that we need to accomplish during this time? Okay. And what's the budget impact for every single hire, right? So when you can't turn on the faucet like you used to, you have to conserve water. You have to make sure that every drop of water goes somewhere, and that each effort needs to be accounted for, so that you could flow longer when your tank is less full. And using that, we identified some key areas to our business model, and we moved everything online to the cloud, and to make it easier to deploy. We make all systems integrated, so it's one system versus multiple systems, and so it's easier to deploy both at home and in the hospital. It's the same system, it's in the same cloud, and so and because we can't visit the hospitals, we could work to optimize our technology. So we increase our capability in those areas. And so it's very difficult to survive. It's the hardest thing that I'm doing. Being a professor or being a doctor is less stressful, believe it or not, than being a startup founder. And but it's an experience that I think that makes me more focused in many ways.
I'm with you because I know how you've been through. So I have been.
You've been extraordinarily helpful.
Yes,
Great,
wonderful. We are partners. So
Wonderful.
I know the situation changed. We want to be more dynamic and adapt to it. And we need to move faster, right? Agility. So that's how you transform the startup that way. It's not always like you have planned, but you have to detour. Sometimes make you a stronger, come up with a stronger competitor. So as we all know that Taiwan plays a critical role in global supply chain in terms of high-tech and also biotech dreams. From your perspective, what kind of industry competitiveness that Taiwan possesses and could be further harnessed in terms of staying in a good position of global supply chain amid economic uncertainty? You can go first.
Okay, I'll go first. And so I think Taiwan as a global supply chain partner has several advantages. Okay. The first advantage is that the Taiwanese people work extremely hard. So you could just look at the way TSMC, how it runs its operations in Taiwan, and when it's trying to transition to Arizona because of culture and different other issues. In Taiwan, I think there is the level of training, education, and ethics, work ethics, make it a great supply chain partner. And the second advantage is this trust that has been built between U.S. entrepreneurs and Taiwan supply chain partners over the last 30, 40 years, starting with the semiconductor industry, then the PC industry, then the Apple supply chain. And these partnerships require a lot of trust. And once that trust is built, it's no longer transactional. No longer I buy this from you this time, I buy it from somebody else next time. It's a relational partnership. And when it becomes a relational partnership, it's more resilient. So to build a resilient supply chain requires fundamental trust and repeated business and the ability to actually deliver. And so I think that's the advantage that Taiwan has. Now, Taiwan could improve on one or two things. One is grow more business talent so that understanding more of the business models that's applied globally and upgrade its language capabilities and cultural capabilities so that when Taiwanese entrepreneurs come to the US or elsewhere, that they know the culture better, they know what people are thinking. That will build even a better partnership to supply chain.
Yeah, actually, last week I was this week I was in Tokyo, attending the startup. Similar things, they try to become also entrepreneurship, and they declare that's the first year of the entrepreneurship for the startup in Japan. I was so surprised that they, one of their congressmen, leader in the Congress, they're saying that. As I recall, 8 years ago when I was called to help out Taiwan to connect to Silicon Valley, actually that's the theme that we decided. We're going to, foster the entrepreneurship and be able to bring up the Taiwan from the efficient, economy to a more innovation economy. So I think Taiwan supply chain, for these days, I travel into Europe and also to other part of the country. They always, admire what we have accomplished in the ICT business and in the advanced manufacturing area. I think that's the strength that we really want to, build on top of that and to really lead the supply chain in the world. Last but not okay.
Actually, I think Jason also made a really good point about the world is more interconnected, and so you're working across borders, but importantly across cultures. And I think there is an opportunity for improvement there to read who your counterparty is. If you're coming from Taiwan or from Taiwanese culture, you're typically quite humble, and that plays very well in some markets, and it's very different in others. The United States, Americans are renowned for being a little bit more outgoing and optimistic, and maybe a little bit more braggadocious. So I think there are other societies, like in the Nordics, for example, that are actually quite similar in terms of humility and their willingness to work hard and high integrity and high honesty cultures. The point is, if you want to be successful globally, you have to be able to interact and capture the attention and build a relationship with people of all types, because the substance is there. The substance is absolutely there when you're talking about what Taiwan is capable of and what Taiwanese companies are capable of. But the marketing could probably use some improvement.
Okay, so last but not the least, maybe an easy, maybe a challenge question for Eric. I get to ask by some of my friends in the audience. So they're very interested in getting into the venture, sector. So what's your advice to those who would like to join? And anything that they need to be prepared, or is this a sexy sector that you encourage them to get in?
I don't think it's as cool as it was 2 years ago. I think if the number one thing I think you need to be in this business is probably curiosity, because as in any investment, there's a saying I really like is that the past does not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So there were lessons learned, and I brought that up around search engines and Google to illustrate the point about AI. But you have to be curious enough when you see something new and you ask yourself, is this worth investing in? Is the market big enough? Will the customers actually switch from one to the other? Will this business model actually make sense? What is it about this person that you might trust with your capital makes them tick? What's their actual motivation? Because certainly the last couple of years, there were a lot of people who wanted to be founders because they thought it was cool. Like that was, they want to be in TechCrunch and on Twitter or whatever. not really that substantive, particularly when it gets hard like it is now. So probably, yeah, the number one piece of advice is be curious and don't stop your investigation or analysis at the first step or the second step or even the third step. And take the opportunity to meet people, because every meeting that you have, you're either going to feel better about someone and the opportunity or worse, but it's guaranteed not to be the same.
Well, thank you for the conclusion. I would like to thank you, Eric, and also Jason, to join us such a insightful discussion and fun. I hope that you also enjoy, and I hope everyone also enjoy our chatting. Thank you very much. Yeah.